Bonnie and Clyde are perhaps the most romanticized outlaws of all time. At a time when gangsters were celebrities, they stood out. They caught the attention of the media and the public during the Great Depression, but eventually the tide turned. Here's the truth about Bonnie and Clyde. While Bonnie and Clyde may have ended up finding fame by killing people and robbing banks, they probably could have just taken a more legal route to get there. Both were talented in far more traditional ways. According to historical sources, Clyde Burrow was a natural musician. His brother-in-law had taught him to play the saxophone, but he also played guitar. Clyde enjoyed sharing his music with the impoverished people of the South, and he would often play his guitar around campfires in the West Dallas campgrounds. Bonnie Parker was the one who actively wanted to be famous, though. Sources who worked on 2 separate Bonnie and Clyde movies claim she wanted to be a celebrity by any means: a Broadway star, a singer, a Hollywood actress, or even a poet. She did have talent. Growing up, Bonnie starred in school plays and pageants. Texas Monthly reports that when a boy once upstaged her, she punched him, then cartwheeled across the stage after the audience broke out into applause. Once she became famous for her life of crime, she referred to their fans as, quote, her public, and signed autographs. Bonnie and Clyde are up there with Romeo and Juliet when it comes to famous romantic relationships, but Bonnie had found love long before meeting Clyde. In 1926, she met and married Roy Thornton, and they never divorced. Roy was a naturally good-looking man, but Bonnie definitely had a type. While sometimes referred to as a welder, Roy was, in fact, a hardened criminal.
I know a killer when I see one.
The two met when Bonnie was just 15, and a year later she dropped out of school to marry him. She even went as far as getting their names tattooed in a heart above her knee. But Roy would disappear for long stretches, committing crimes and seeing other women. Bonnie probably knew about the cheating, and she wrote as much in her diary. When he left for the 3rd time in less than a year, she was pretty over it. She refused to take him back and swore off all men. When Bonnie met Clyde almost 2 years later, it was love at first sight. But she would continue to wear Roy's wedding ring until the day she died. Clyde's initial brushes with the law were pretty minor, but his crimes continued to escalate until he was 21 years old, when he was sent to prison for burglary. Eastham Prison Farm was no joke. Even at a time when prisons were known to be horrific, Eastham was considered to be one of the absolute worst. Prisoners were regularly beaten by guards and subjected to torturous punishments. One particular guard would execute prisoners point blank and later claimed they had died trying to escape. Clyde never spoke of his experience at Eastham with those he loved. Years later, a friend explained how prison had changed Clyde, saying he had gone, quote, from a schoolboy to a rattlesnake.
He wasn't born that way. He wasn't born with no dark soul.
Oddly, by the time they died, both Bonnie and Clyde would suffer injuries that made it difficult for them to walk. For Clyde, it began with the back-breaking hard labor he endured during his time at Eastham. Hoping for a transfer to a less terrifying environment, he asked another prisoner to chop off some of his toes with an axe. It wound up being pointless. The parole board had already agreed to release him, and Clyde left Eastham 6 days after mutilating himself. But it had a lasting impact on his ability to walk, and he had to drive in his stockinged feet from then on. Bonnie had less choice when it came to her injury. In June 1933, the two were on the run when Clyde badly crashed their car. He was fine, but Bonnie had battery acid leak onto her right leg, eating away to the bone in some areas.
She dragged her left leg. She gimp?
Despite the seriousness, the outlaw refused to go to a hospital, relying instead on Clyde and other members of the gang to take care of her. She never walked properly again. It wouldn't be wrong to call Bonnie and Clyde the first American reality stars. The public followed their exploits for 2 years, romanticizing their horrific crimes because they were a young, beautiful couple in love. The fact that they weren't married made it even more risque. It was perfect tabloid fodder, except it was also front-page news of legitimate newspapers. The pair shot to fame after police discovered some rolls of undeveloped film at one of their raided safe houses. The cops processed the pictures, a local newspaper ran them, and they were sent over the wires. The public loved them.
And all I can say is, they did right with me, and I'm bringing me a mess of flowers to their funeral.
They showed the couple larking about with each other, Bonnie on Clyde's shoulders or pretending to shoot him. The most famous of all was an image of Bonnie with a cigar between her teeth and a pistol in her hand, looking like the perfect gun moll. This would be how the public would go on to imagine her, even though she didn't normally handle guns and she preferred cigarettes over cigars. Thanks to those photos, the couple went from local Texas outlaws to superstars of the criminal underworld. Plenty of people died at the hands of various members of the Burrow gang. Clyde himself is thought to have killed 10 alone. But in spite of all the chances that Bonnie and Clyde had to kill, they didn't always take them. Instead, the couple seemed to enjoy kidnapping people and traveling around with them, regardless of whether they were civilians or police officers.
Let's take them.
On some occasions, they would give their kidnapping victims money to get back home. The podcast, Stuff You Missed in History Class, recalls a time when a kidnapped officer asked Bonnie if there was anything she wanted him to tell the press after his release. She said to tell them that she didn't really smoke cigars. The fact that Bonnie and Clyde didn't kill everyone they came across might have been one of the reasons the public loved them so much. But a single mistake turned the tide. When two policemen approached their car one morning, Clyde's cry of "let's take them" was misunderstood by a gang member and he started shooting. After the officers' deaths, public opinion turned against the couple. The duo and their gang became famous for robbing banks. They stole nice cars, and the pictures that circulated showed them wearing fancy clothes. Jim Wright, a former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, recalled, "It was a very romantic existence we felt they must enjoy. And even if you did not approve of them, you still would have to envy them a little, to be so good-looking and rich and happy." In reality, their infamous robberies were unimpressive. The gang lived hand-to-mouth and continued to hold places up because they never got much money out of it. In fact, they never took more than $1,500, and once they got as little as $80.
I don't want no rich man.
They were so desperate for cash, sometimes they would break into vending machines for food money. They robbed fewer than 15 banks during their 21-month crime spree. And since it was the Great Depression, things didn't always go as planned. At one point, a member of the gang attempted to rob the Pondersay Bank of Texas, only to be told it failed a week earlier.
What money, mister? There ain't no money here.
And there was no money to steal. Clyde apparently thought this was hilarious when he was told. But Bonnie and Clyde's choice in targets was extremely disappointing. Knowing that there was less of a chance of being caught if they robbed small-town restaurants, grocery stores, and gas stations, those were the places they normally hit. So they weren't hurting the man so much as the little guy. Bonnie might be the most famous woman in Clyde's life, but there was another equally important one. Burrow, Clyde's mother, was fundamental in enabling his life of crime. After the couple's death, the U.S. government put a number of their family members on trial for aiding the outlaws. In his closing arguments, the prosecutor roared that Cumi was the real mastermind behind the conspiracy. Cumi was certainly more than just a mother who loved her criminal son. When Clyde first went to prison, authorities tried to pin a killing on him, but Cumi swore he was with her in a different city when the crime occurred. In order to make her son look like just a boy, she said the 21-year-old had only just turned 18. She tried to get him out of jail by claiming to be a widow who needed the support of her son, although her husband was very much alive. Her lies worked. The parole board's eventual decision to release Clyde early was made based on Cumi's story.
I love you, Mom.
Once Bonnie and Clyde began their crime spree, Cumi gave them clothing and board. She gave weepy interviews, denying she knew Bonnie and asserting Clyde's innocence. And when it came time for her own sentencing, Cumi managed to cry her way into just 1 month behind bars. Bonnie and Clyde's names might go together, but they weren't equally violent, not by a long shot. Eyewitness reports say Bonnie never wielded a gun, always waited in the car when they were holding up banks, and almost certainly never killed anyone herself. Before turning to a life of crime, Bonnie was bright and popular. According to one historical source, she was kind-hearted and would look out for other less fortunate classmates, breaking her pencils in half for those who couldn't afford their own.
Must be one hard lady.
To the contrary, sir. Little bitty thing. Can't weigh but 90 pounds. Smartest girl in school. She was in all the plays, won the spelling bee.
So what was she doing with someone like Clyde? According to Psychology Today, Bonnie was probably attracted to violent men because she suffered from hybristophilia. Typically women, hybristophiliacs gain pleasure when their partner commits a crime, particularly a violent one. Roy Thornton fit the bill, but if worse crimes equal a bigger turn-on, then Clyde must have really done it for her.
Ain't that romantic?
Part of the attraction may be that they feel special. While their mate becomes increasingly more violent toward others, it will supposedly never be directed at them. And Bonnie is such a perfect example of someone with hybristophilia that it's often called the Bonnie and Clyde Syndrome. Dying didn't tone down the craziness for Bonnie and Clyde. Within 24 hours, the population of the nearest town swelled from 2,000 to 12,000 people. As the car with the bodies inside was hauled to the morgue, trophy hunters reached in to grab things, either from the car or the couple's bodies. One huckster offered Clyde's parents $50,000 to turn his mummified body into a traveling attraction. They refused, but when the stolen death car was returned, its owner put it on tour. You can still take selfies with it today. The outlaws' bodies were returned to Dallas, where they went on public display at 2 mortuaries. Around 10,000 people came to see Clyde, while 20,000 showed up for Bonnie. The couple had asked to be buried next to each other, but Bonnie's mother wouldn't hear of it. They were laid to rest in Dallas cemeteries a couple miles apart. Bonnie and Clyde may finally have the chance to be reunited, however. In 2019, it was reported that the couple's descendants were considering making their wish of being buried next to each other a reality. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.